here. Just give me 1 second. There's a couple of people here who are not muted. If we could mute, you guys can mute yourself. Okay, there you go. Looks like, what do we got today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Six people. So I guess maybe you guys are having a rough time and the others weren't able to get themselves going and join us. So you guys have posted your the marks for your phase 1 ESAs. Generally speaking, I was quite pleased with the phase 1s, because what as instructors, what we always have to remember is you guys did this without the benefit of having a really experienced person on your team that would help guide you through it and help with the preparation of the final report. So as I say, I was quite pleased with how they turned out. Does anybody have any questions about their phase 1 ESA report that they did? Any questions, any comments? No. Looks like everyone is happy with how it came out. It turned out. The other thing with this, to give you guys some experience of working with groups that you wouldn't necessarily have selected yourself. I have been through the group assessments that you guys filled in, and I've taken note of the assessment. One thing that did surprise me a little bit about those assessments is the people that were actually filling out the assessment seemed to be pretty hard on themselves. I just figured, you know, when you saw the assessment and it was the person filling it out, it would be 5, 5, 5, 5 all the way down. But some people tended to be a bit hard on themselves, but I have taken a look at them all, and I've taken them into consideration. So if anybody does have any questions or concerns, then maybe you can email me if you want to discuss it a bit more. Okay, so I'm going to start off with my normal tirade. You guys are probably getting pretty fed up of me and my tirades, but there's something that I want to show you guys. Right? There's been two really big items that have hit the news over the last week that deals with academic integrity, right? And I just want to give you guys an example of of how important academic integrity is, right? So this week, for whatever reason, Humber College decided to go back and take a look at their real estate licensing exams, and they found out that there's been a history of cheating on the exams. And as a result of the first review, 34 Toronto real estate agents had their licenses revoked. Right, so these are people who, I mean, I don't know how long ago, but at least a year ago, wrote their licensing exam. They were accepted by the Real Estate Council of Ontario to be licensed real estate agents, and then this popped up and they have had their licenses revoked. So that is a huge deal. So these people can no longer perform their job. They're no longer licensed to sell real estate. And because governing bodies like the real estate boards and engineering technologists of Ontario, professional engineers of Ontario, because they all have ethics requirements, these people will never be able to get licensed again with the real estate board, and it would be highly unlikely they would ever be able to get licensed again with any other licensing body, because they have demonstrated that they are not of good ethical character, right? So the Humber College has actually issued a statement. They issued a statement about this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this link to the Humber College statement into our chat. If I can multitask, I'm not sure if I can multitask this way, all right? So that you guys at your leisure can take a look at the statement from Humber College, right? But it's a classic example of why academic integrity is so important, because it can come back to haunt you. It came back to haunt these people after they were away from the college and after they had started their career, right? So a classic example of why academic integrity is so important. And then the second thing, this one has actually been in the works for about a year now, and it relates to this behavioral ecologist, Jonathan Pruitt. Can you guys see this, my screen here, where it's got the photograph of Jonathan Pruitt? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you can see Mr. Pruitt. So Jonathan Pruitt was known to be one of the leading behavioral ecologists in the world, and in fact, about 2 years or 3 years ago, Canada lured him from a university in the States and provided him with a Canada Research Chair at McMaster University, in which he gets $300,000 a year to run a behavioral ecologist lab at McMaster. So essentially what has happened with Mr. Pruitt is somebody started to look at his old scientific papers, and they found out that the data that he was presenting in his scientific papers was not legitimate. It was not legitimate data. They actually went back and looked at his PhD thesis, and they found that there were integrity issues with his thesis. So they have actually revoked Jonathan Pruitt's PhD thesis, which means that he has now lost his PhD, and he can no longer work as a professor at any university in North America. And McMaster University has now just put him onto paid leave while they decide what they're going to do with him. So it's. I know I keep harping on you guys about this. I would hate to be sitting, drinking my coffee on my rocking chair when I'm older, and up pops an article about an old student of mine who has, had their license revoked to do something. So I just thought I would give those examples, 2 examples that are in the news this week, of exactly why academic integrity is so important, and why I harp on academic integrity. So I just sent you the link to that article as well, so that you can take a look at that. Okay. So now that I've done my rant for this morning, and see we've had a few other people join us. So I put the 2 links to those items in the chat. You guys might want to click on those links, and then you can read them at some other time. So essentially we're through phase 1s and phase 2s. We've done the phase 1 report that was given as an assignment. We've done the first test, which was heavily weighted on phase 1s and phase 2s. I think it was entirely weighted on phase 1s and phase 2s. There was a couple of questions in there about auditing that I took out, because we never did manage to get to the auditing portion of the course before the test. So what I want to do today is I want to go through, hopefully relatively quickly, go through the auditing lecture. So we can talk a little bit about some of the various environmental audits that are out there. If we get through that today, then I will start on section 5, which is air emissions. The next test that we have is going to be heavily weighted on air emissions and atmospheric dispersion modeling. As we move through that, you're going to see there's a fair bit of math involved in that, so you guys will get to brush up on your math skills. So we're looking at next week to finish up the air emission section, the week after to do the air modeling, and then the week after that we will do the second test, which will be based heavily on those two modules. So what I will do is I will start to post some review material for that test, so that you guys can maybe start on your own doing some review. So any questions about that? So that is going to work out to be, let me see if I can quickly figure out this date. So that would be, I would intend having that test on November 10th. Oh, sorry. So next week. So November 9th, sorry, December 9th. So December 9th for test 2. And then we have a couple of other modules to get through quickly after that. And then we do test 3. So we are going to have 2 tests in fairly quick succession. If by any chance we can get through the 2 the emissions and the modeling component, maybe we might be able to bring that next test up to November the 2nd, but we'll see how we make out there. So I still want to quickly go through the environmental auditing module, okay, and that is module 4. All right, so you guys can all see my PowerPoint. Okay, so as it says here, this is Unit 4, environmental audits. I think hopefully we can get through this in the next hour. But the main topics of this component is we're going to look at the different audits that are out there: environmental compliance audits, waste audits, ISO 14001 EMS audits, energy use audits, and water use audits. So at least several of these. It's definitely waste audits and ISO 14000 audits. We've looked at a bit in our waste lectures, so these shouldn't be new to you guys. Ones that maybe we haven't looked at so much are environmental compliance audits, energy use audits, and water use audits. Okay, there are many types of environmental audits, including environmental compliance audits, 14001 audits, waste audits, energy audits, and water use audits. In general, audits, so excluding waste audits, are not required by legislation. So the use format and material investigated as an individual company's choice. Environmental audits are generally seen as being proactive. So out of all these audits that we're going to take a look at, only the waste audits are actually legislated, and they're legislated under Ontario Regulation 101, 102, 103, and there are specific requirements for conducting those audits, and you find those requirements within those regulations. But when you come to environmental compliance audits in the ISO 14001 and energy and water use, they're not regulated anywhere that facilities have to conduct these type of audits. So actually, so no, somebody just said, is that one of the environmental door kickers that we're going to become acquainted with on December 6th. So this is actually a provincial environmental officer. They don't come across as authoritarian as the federal people, but they can. They do wear official uniforms. They carry a very fancy badge with them, and they like to show that badge to people when they're out doing audits. So they do carry a fair bit of weight to them. But as I say, they're not as authoritarian as the federal inspectors, and they tend to be a bit easier to get along with. So as I said, most of these audits are proactive, and proactive essentially means they're being undertaken on a voluntary basis, so that areas of improvement can be identified by the entity taking on these audits. So environmental compliance audits investigate an organization's level of compliance with environmental statutes, regulations, local laws, and other identified criteria. There are no regulatory requirements for conducting compliance audits. Environmental compliance audits provide management with the corporation's record of compliance, and they also review the systems of internal management and control and identify existing or potential problem areas. Some industrial facilities will conduct specific compliance audits where somebody goes in there. And if those facilities have environmental management systems in place, they will have a list of, it's classified as the list of applicable legislation. So the facility has went through previously and they've identified every piece of legislation that in some way, shape or form applies to the facility. And those pieces of legislation are listed in their environmental management system. So in some cases, those lists of applicable legislation are already there. In other cases, auditors who are retained to come in and do those audits just bring a list of all the environmental audits that they think might be applicable, and then they will be audited to that. So an environmental compliance audit will look at things like the requirement to obtain environmental compliance approval. So an auditor will go into the facility and he will look to see, does the facility have any existing environmental compliance approvals in place? If they are, do those compliance approvals contain any conditions, and is the facility complying with those conditions? They will also look at the facility's existing air emissions to ensure that all air emissions are actually included in their environmental compliance approvals. So these are proactive audits that are done, and the goal of an environmental compliance audit is to specifically identify areas where the facility is not in compliance. And if it's a minor issue, that the facility can be brought into compliance relatively quickly. If it's a major compliance issue that will require significant time and investment to address, then the audit is used to provide management with what the non-compliance is, what's the ramifications for it, how can that non-compliance be closed, and then management can dedicate the resources and the finances in order to address there. They also review the systems of internal management and control and identify existing or potential problem areas, as I just described. You usually find, and I may have just mentioned this, but you usually find that these compliance audits are actually done, or at least a component of an environmental compliance audit is actually done as part of an ISO 14001 audit. So by identifying existing or potential problems, companies can benefit from early warning and detection of problems, compliance with regulations, verification of the effectiveness of established environmental management policies, collection of information for liability insurance programs, identification of cost savings, and help in the development of a facility rehabilitation budget. And when we talk about a rehabilitation budget, it's a budget that provides the funds to bring the facility into compliance. There are significant advantages to an environmental compliance audit. Facility is much further ahead if they identify the non-compliance issues themselves, because they can address those non-compliances on their terms. I always encourage my clients to address non-compliances as quickly as possible and do it on their terms. The downside to a non-compliance is if an environmental officer drops by and they identify it, now you're addressing that non-compliance on the ministry's terms, which might not exactly meet your terms. So when a non-compliance is identified by a ministry environmental officer, that is generally followed up by a notice of violation that puts in place certain deadlines and timelines for the facility to come into compliance. And some of those, depending on the seriousness of the non-compliance, those deadlines can be fairly short. So it can be a significant challenge at the facilities to be all of a sudden thrown into this, where they have to address these non-compliances. And it's been my experience that even with companies that are generally good at monitoring their environmental compliance, even they, when they undergo compliance inspections from the ministry, certain issues will be identified, and they usually end up having to deal with non-compliance issues, as I say, on the Ministry of the Environment's terms, or Environment Canada's terms. Environmental compliance audits, the International Standards Organization, or ISO, and the CSA, Canadian Standards Association, have developed guidance documents for conducting environmental compliance audits. Guidance documents are intended to provide a consistent framework and minimum requirements for conducting ESAs in order to ensure that the ECAs address regulatory and liability requirements, as well as site-specific requirements. And these documents include ISO 19011 and CSA Z773-17. So these standards, they even though environmental compliance audits are not regulated, following these standards ensures that a standardized process is followed by the facilities or consultants while they're conducting these environmental compliance audits. And because they're standardized, you usually result in a better quality environmental compliance audit. There's less chance that certain items may be missed. Okay, a comprehensive environmental compliance audit examines policy or policies for compliance available. Is there evidence that facility personnel are aware of and understand the policies as they relate to the particular duties? They look at regulations. Do facility workers know and comply with all company standards and local, provincial, and federal legislation? Are copies of these standards and legislations readily available? Are implications for non-compliance understood? Are permits current, and are copies available? So those are all things that environmental compliance audits look at. And as it says there at the beginning, policies. One of the areas that they do look at is a facilities environmental policy and what that says. And there are many companies out there that have an environmental policy, but the policy is not well advanced to employees. So in some cases, it's just a nice piece of paper that is up on the wall when somebody walks into the facility to let them know that they have an environmental policy. But in other facilities, and especially ones that have developed environmental management systems, those policies are taken seriously, and they are communicated to employees and also contractors. When we were at the plant with some of the students there a couple of weeks ago, part of their orientation was the company's environmental policy and what they needed to know about the policy. And of course, the compliance audit takes a hard look at regulations, and they look at the facility workers. Do they know and comply with all company standards and legislation? And again, for facilities who have functioning environmental management systems, employees are trained usually on an annual basis on their policy and on their environmental management system and on the applicable legislation and what they need to know from a worker standpoint in order to assist them in complying with the legislation. So, and it looks like our copies of these standards and legislation is readily available. Most facilities under their EMS will have actual copies of the legislation, either in hard copy or electronic format, and our implications for non-compliance understood within the workforce at a facility. And in most facilities that I deal with, most employees are aware of the implications for non-compliance. It's something that people have become much more aware of over the last 10, 15, 20 years. If you were to go back 30 years ago and you walked into a facility, the general workforce, I mean, they were usually completely unaware of environmental regulations and how their jobs could impact the facilities compliance. And our permits current and our copies available. This one is a pretty big one. Well, undergoing an environmental compliance audit, or if you're undergoing an inspection by the Ministry of the Environment, the environmental compliance approval for the facility is there and available. I am just curious, have any of you guys actually looked at an actual environmental compliance approval? Have you seen one? Has anyone seen one? No. So it sounds like you guys have never. So what I'm going to do is at the break, I will pull up a couple of environmental compliance approvals so that you guys can see one and see what it looks like. But essentially, an environmental compliance approval for air emissions, it will list to the facilities every air emission source they have. It will list them and it will identify them. So either a compliance auditor or a ministry provincial officer, they can walk through the plant and they can look and see, does your air emission sources that are in the plant match up with what is on the environmental compliance approval document? If it does, you're in good shape. If it doesn't, and an example of that would be if an environmental compliance approval said a facility has 5 paint spray booths, and a Ministry of the Environment officer walks out there and there are 6 spray booths, you are not in compliance with your environmental compliance approval. And then a notice of violation would be issued requiring you to update that environmental compliance approval. Okay. They also look at plant and design operations. Is environmental protection equipment installed and performing well enough to comply with legislation? And is the equipment technologically advanced to provide the best protection available? This later concern may be beyond the expertise of environmental auditors and stresses the need for teamwork by a group of professionals involved in the audit. Essentially, what that means is quite often the auditors, ISO 14001 auditors and consultants who are doing environmental compliance audits, they're not generally technical people. They have a good understanding of environmental regulations and how they apply to industrial facilities, but when it comes down to the technical knowledge about pollution control equipment or wastewater treatment systems, they tend to be somewhat lacking in their expertise there, and that's why it is important that groups of professionals like you students, when you graduate, would be involved in the audit. And this is this is actually something we sometimes struggle with the Ministry of the Environment. When Ministry of the Environment officers come out, many of them have never worked in technical areas of the environmental field. So they sometimes struggle with the technical issues that they may be trying to assess at a facility. And for that reason, we do see occasionally, notice of violations that gets issued, where that wouldn't necessarily have been issued if the person writing that notice had a bit stronger of a technical background. Now, Ministry officers, they do have the benefit that they can go back, they can discuss things with supervisors who tend to be more experienced, and they also have the standards development branch and the approvals branch that they can lean on for advice before they issue certain notices of violation. They look at operating procedures and practices. Do written operating procedures exist, including emissions, effluent, and solid waste management practices required by legislation and industry standards? So when you go into these industrial facilities, and again, I say ones with well-functioning environmental management systems, you will see operating procedures and policies in place to cover all the significant aspects of that facility. So an example of that would be is that they would have a waste storage and disposal operating procedure and policy, and that procedure would outline the various steps that employees and supervisors must take when waste is being generated, how they're going to store it, how they're going to identify it, how they're going to ship it, and when they're going to ship it. And these operating procedures and policies, especially around waste, are fairly important because you don't want to end up having waste stored on site for longer than is allowed under the legislation, because that is one of the most common environmental non-compliances that we see being issued by the Ontario Ministry of Environment, is for issues surrounding improper storage of waste. And I'll try and pull an example of one of them as well while I'm on break. Source monitoring. Our quantities and qualities of waste and emissions from facilities operations monitored regularly, and is the status of compliance demonstrated through these monitoring programs. So there are many facilities out there who have continuous emission monitors, or SEMs, as they're more commonly called, on some of their emission sources, and those SEMs, as I just said, continuously monitor discharge through an exhaust stack, and they should have, policies in place, to monitor the data that's being collected by these SEMs. I actually have a facility that has continuous emission monitors on two of their exhaust stacks, and unfortunately these monitors store data for about 3 years before it have to be downloaded, and we've been in several situations where they've had an unexpected visit from the Ministry of the Environment, and they haven't downloaded the SAMS data for a year and a half. So now we're in a position where, the Ministry of the Environment is now looking at data that we haven't looked at, and there could be potential non-compliances in there. So these environmental compliance audits will look at, are the monitoring programs being effective and being monitored and managed properly to ensure that the potential non-compliances are addressed immediately and corrected before it becomes a major issue. Okay. Environmental compliance audits. Maintenance. Does maintenance provide prompt corrective action where equipment contributes to environmental risks? And this is something I'll try and show you on an environmental compliance approval. Most environmental compliance approvals contain specific conditions surrounding maintenance of equipment. So environmental compliance audits will zero in on those conditions and see, is the maintenance required by the compliance approval being carried out, and is it effective? Is it effective in reducing emissions to the atmosphere? Monitoring of effects of emissions and waste on the environment. Is the monitoring program effective? How often are samples taken? Have appropriate remedial actions been taken? So we see this especially where we're dealing with old historical plants. And they have historical groundwater contamination. We have monitoring programs, sampling programs, and remedial action programs in place to address that situation. So compliance audits will look at that. Spill contingency measures. Are written emergency response procedures available, up to date, and easily understood? Do they include contingency plans and resources necessary to handle incidental discharges? Spill contingency measures and plans are something that many facilities that do not have them. Most of our clients that have spill contingency plans in place are required to have them, and usually they're required under federal legislation. There are some requirements under provincial legislation for certain industries to have spill contingency measures, but most of the most of the facilities that I deal with are required to have them under federal legislation. So compliance audits will look at them. We'll look at, are the emergency response procedures, are they easily understood, and are they going to be adequate to handle any type of accidental discharge. Incident reporting and remedy are reports detailing incidental discharge follow-up activities and corrective actions to prevent recurrence prepared. So we're going to see this, and it might be it's going to be in this slide. So I'll talk to you a bit about that on this slide. So environmental training: are workers aware of the environmental implications of their operations? Is the flow of information effective in promoting awareness and providing necessary details? Do workers have ready access to technical literature and publications and education programs? Contractor selection and performance: are contractors aware of company policy? So now I'm going to ask you guys a question, and you can throw your answer in the chat. For the students who were at the A.G. Simpson plant, do you recall going through the environmental policy at the A.G. Simpson plant? Do you guys recall that? Yes. Okay. So what is that acronym that they ask the contractors to remember? Any of you guys remember that? So it doesn't look like it stuck with you guys. But essentially, A.G. Simpson and most other facilities under their environmental. Yep, nope, don't recall. And most other facilities that we deal with have the acronym COPS that is associated with their environmental policy, because it's a fairly easy acronym to remember. And now I'm going to struggle remembering it myself. But C is for continuous improvement. O is for obey the law. P is for pollution prevention. And I think S is just put on the end so that it makes COPS. But many facilities use that acronym because it sticks. It sticks easily with their employees, and they go through it when they're doing their annual environmental awareness training. Do contractors have good environmental records? Are contractors' responsibilities clearly defined? And does the company monitor the work performed by contractors? Most facilities that we deal with, the answer to that is definitely yes. Believe it or not, contractors are a significant source of non-compliant discharges and spills at industrial facilities, because contractors don't necessarily pay a whole bunch of attention to environmental legislation, and they tend to dump things down sinks, or they tend to. We have actually had many instances of contractors, just disposing of waste on the ground surface of plants. So most facilities usually manage their contractors fairly tightly, because contractors are, can be a significant source of environmental non-compliances. And external communication: is there a system set up to handle complaints and requests for information from external sources? And this is something that we work a fair bit with our clients. And I started to kind of mention it briefly in the slide before, but external communications: is there a system set up to handle complaints? In most cases, if a member of the public calls an industrial plant, they're going to either get a receptionist or they're going to get a security guard. So the member of the public calls in and says, there's a horrible smell in the neighborhood and it's coming from your plants, and you need to do something about it. Or, my house is shaking from the vibration that your plant is causing. Is there a system set up to take those complaints? So does the receptionist and the security guard, do they know how to escalate those complaints when they come in from the public? And who do those complaints go to, and how are they handled? We have dealt with many situations where a member of the public has called a facility, spoken to a security guard, who had no idea on what to do with the complaint and essentially sat on it. The member of the public gets really upset, calls the Ministry of the Environment, and now we're into that situation I described earlier, where we're dealing with the situation on the Ministry of the Environment's terms instead of dealing with it on our terms. You know, in most cases, when you get complaints from the public, you know, they are people who live in the community and they work in the community, and they just want to see the issue addressed. But because of the awareness surrounding environmental issues now, members of the public tend to be much quicker now to go to the Ministry of the Environment and to lodge a complaint with them if they get no response or no satisfaction from the facility that they're complaining about. So the external communications is a really important thing, and especially large industrial facilities spend a lot of time on training of the security guards and the training of people who take general phone calls or even general emails to the company as to how they should deal with these type of complaints. So this is an example of a checklist this checklist could be taken right from the ISO or the CSA standard, or it could be within the facility's applicable legislation portion of their ISO 14001. And it's a checklist that they can be used when they're doing internal audits or if they're undergoing an external compliance audit. And this one looks specifically at compliance with TSSA regulations and underground storage tanks. So as you see, you know, you can go down through this and look at the this bottom one: underground steel storage tanks installed prior to May 1st, 1974 and upgraded shall be removed unless a permanent monitoring well and depressed current cathodic protection have been installed. So that's specific items that, you know, that the auditor would look at, and any comments that he might have would be in the box at the right here. Okay, so the comment could be just simply, you know, fully compliant, or, you know, this underground storage tank is not compliant with existing legislation and needs to be either brought into compliance or removed. Okay, so waste audits. We looked at waste audits fairly extensively in the waste legislation. Apparently Durham College did a waste audit back on October 12th and 13th of 2013, where students from Durham College actually conducted the waste audit. This is a good example of people doing a waste audit. It's usually pretty stinky and you got to go rooting through all kinds of unpleasant garbage. But the one that was done back in 2013 targeted various Durham College and Yoit, which is now Ontario Tech buildings. It's used to measure the amount of recyclable and waste materials disposed of on site and highlight areas that need improvement. For 2 days, waste was collected from different buildings, sorted, then weighed, and more than half of the waste contents were actually recyclable. And that is not unusual if we're doing a waste audit for the first time. Is that when you go in there, the majority of the material is actually recyclable material. And you can see from this garbage bag right here, I mean, there are newspapers, you know, there's a plastic water bottle, you know, both items that are easily recyclable. But that waste audit sets the baseline for the facility to, you know, implement actions and then try to improve in their waste diversion. Tim Hortons cups are an annual concern because most people don't know whether they should throw into the garbage or recycle. In reality, the cup itself is garbage. However, the lid is recyclable. So we actually work for one of the major suppliers of not only Tim Hortons cups, but also some of the other coffee chains. And part of the issue, people look at these coffee cups as they're paper cups, and they can be thrown in the recycling to be recycled. The issue is that these cups are actually what's called co-extruded. So you have a paper layer, which is the outer layer, and then on the inside, is extruded a plastic layer. So because those two layers are bonded, the cup itself is not recyclable. It's it's not wholly paper. It's not wholly plastic. There has been many efforts made at trying to come up with a recycling method for these, or to try to degrade them in some way. But as far as I know, to this point in time, there's nothing that people have or companies have been able to come up with that allows for these to be recycled. But as it says here, the lid is recyclable. And we see this in the facility that manufactures these cups, is that when they have the co-extruded paper and plastic, when they get rejected, essentially, those containers have to be shredded and just shipped off, wherever these cups go to reside, when they've been rejected. But the lids can actually be reground and put right back through the process. So the lids are recyclable. The way that I personally try to deal with this is I use my my reusable cup, and I get that filled wherever I can. So I eliminate the use of a cup, which is a bit problematic right now, because if you go into a coffee shop, most of them will not fill a reusable cup because of the pandemic. So you have to take your coffee in a cup, pour it into your reusable cup, and off you go. Already, high traffic areas in the college, including the CD, L, and South Wings, were identified as being problematic, with the majority of garbage coming from classrooms and offices. Already implemented waste reduction measures include the placing of more recycling containers and the composting of organic waste from the Marketplace Cafe. I don't know where the results of this waste audit that was conducted at the college are residing, but when we looked at waste audits in the waste lecture, I showed you some examples of how the data was processed, and you could actually go back and take a look at those lecture slides if you wanted to see some examples. Waste audits. The 3 R's regulations were enacted in 1994 with the goal of reducing the amount of material being disposed of from industrial, commercial, and institutional sectors. The 5 regulations, Regulation 101, 102, 103, 104, and 105. We did look at these audits in a fair bit of detail over in the waste lecture, so I won't spend a whole bunch more time rehashing this, but I mean, essentially these regulations, 102/94 is the one that we most commonly work with, because that lays out the requirements for large industrial facilities to conduct waste audits and prepare waste reduction action plans. Under Regulation 102, the 4 basic components: conducting a waste audit, developing a waste reduction work plan, implementing the work plan, and updating and implementing the waste audit and waste work plan annually. So I still deal with a lot of facilities that have never done their waste audit and waste reduction work plans, even though they are required to do them. And in many cases, those facilities have underwent ministry inspections, and they've never asked to see their waste audits and the waste reduction work plans. In some instances they do, but in the majority of the cases, it seems to me, from my perspective, is that officers there looking for bigger fish to fry, other than the waste audit. And even when they really can't find a whole bunch, with facilities that don't have them, we typically don't see a notice of violation written under waste audits. Where we do see notice of violations written under these regulations is large-scale construction and demolition projects, where they're not sorting the material in a manner that it can be easily recycled. So we do see notice of violation being issued there, but not so much in the industrial and commercial sector. The following are covered by the regulations: retail shopping establishments, if they have an area of at least 10,000 square meters, so that would be the Oshawa Center would fall under that. Office buildings with floor area of at least 10,000 square meters for use as offices. Uh, uh, there probably are. I just can't think of. If you were to look at the Regional Derm headquarters in Rossland, it's big enough that it would fall under this regulation. Restaurants with gross sales for all restaurants operated by the owner in Ontario of $3 million or more. Hotels and motels with more than 75 units. Hospitals that are teaching hospitals, general hospitals with more than 100 beds, or chronic care hospitals with more than 200 beds. Educational institutions with more than 350 full or part-time persons enrolled, and large manufacturing establishments with employees that work in excess of 16,000 hours in any one calendar month. As you can see, educational institutions with more than 350 full or part-time persons enrolled during the calendar year. Durham College clearly falls under that. But I'm not sure exactly what they do with the the information that they garnered from their waste audit and how they're updating that. I would have to think that they are in some way, shape, or form, and the information is being provided to their employees. Okay, so what we're going to do, it's 10 o'clock. We're going to stop here for 10 minutes. And then I'll see you back here at 10 o'clock. I'm going to go and try and find some environmental compliance approvals that I can show you guys, and we can take a quick look at them. Okay, so I will see you in 10 minutes. Okay, thanks, guys. Okay, we're back. And thanks, Megan, for letting me know that I wasn't muted, as I was using my 10-minute break to give my son in Chicago a quick call. I thought I shut the video off, and I thought I had muted myself, but I guess I didn't. So Megan saved you guys from all having to sit there and listen to me have a conversation with my son. So I am going to attempt to try and do this. While I was on my break, I pulled up a couple of documents that I wanted to show you guys. You guys can see my screen. Okay, you can see this amended environmental compliance approval. So this is a typical example of an environmental compliance approval that most industrial facilities have on them. This particular case is made out to Trefilal 2 Incorporated, which was located down in Hawkesbury. And as you can see, it specifically lists what they have as far as their emission sources go. So one dust collector, one exhaust system serving one copper sulfate coating bath, one exhaust system serving one copper sulfate coating bath, one exhaust system serving two copper sulfate coating baths, one exhaust system serving welding operations. So those are the actual air emission sources that are there and are approved. So what happened in the case of this particular plant, and for those of one of you at least recognize the case study I did at Waste last week as being from Lincoln Electric. This was an old Lincoln Electric plant that operated down in Hawkesbury, and that's where we come into the copper sulfate coating baths. This facility unfortunately is now closed. But what happened in this particular case is a ministry officer showed up to do an inspection, and he went through and he counted all these exhaust systems serving the copper sulfate coating tanks, and he found that there's 3 listed, but there were only 2 when he went there to do his inspection. He deemed that to be a modification that required an update to an environmental compliance approval. So we, in very short notice, based on a notice of violation, had to update their environmental compliance approval. So that was a classic case of us having to do it on the terms of the Ministry of the Environment. But this is what an environmental compliance approval looks like. It tells you, the sources that are there, gives you some very specific details about them. For this example here, one dust collector, gives its identification number. It's got a pulse jet cleaning mechanism and 41.4 square meters of cellulose polyester filters, exhausting to the air through a stack identified as 3B at a volumetric flow rate of 0.7 cubic meters per second, having an exit diameter of 0.3. So you can see they're very specific. And once you're approved for these type of approvals, if you amend any of these pieces of equipment, you have not usually triggered the requirement to have to amend your environmental compliance approval. So this is the document that auditors and Ministry of Environment officers look very closely at to see, is your certificate still current? And all of these certificates come with terms and conditions, right? So this one, so the company shall ensure the equipment is properly operated and maintained at all times. Prepare not later than 3 months maintenance manual, and that manual will outline routine operating and maintenance procedures. It will outline emergency procedures, including spill cleanup response. So this is an example, where a facility would be required under legislation to have a spill contingency plan and response procedures, because it's been made part of their environmental compliance approval. Includes any procedures for any record keeping activities relating to the operation and maintenance. It's to provide all appropriate measures to minimize noise and odorous emissions. It is to give the frequency of inspection and replacements of the filters maintained in the equipment. Okay, the second condition is record retention. The company shall retain for a minimum of 2 years from the date of the creation all records and information relating to or resulting from activities acquired by the approval. So essentially, you're going to record all maintenance and repair activities and all records of environmental compliance or environmental complaints. And those records are made available to the staff from the ministry upon request. So you can see that when you undergo an inspection from Ministry of the Environment officer, they're going to zero in on this. They're going to look for this maintenance manual that was supposed to be prepared within 90 days and have all these components to it. So they're going to look for that. And if they find that, then they're going to go look at your record retention and they're going to say, okay, let me see all the maintenance records that have been kept that say that you're maintaining the equipment as per the operation manual. So if they don't have these records, they'll be issued with a notice of violation, and they have to update the program to ensure that they are being kept. Okay, so that's a very good point that Aaron is obviously reading this. Item 1.2 says a restriction of welding to a maximum of 8 hours per day. Is that due to a release of fumes for welding? So in this particular case, let me see, I've lost my screen. Let me just get back to my, apparently I'm screen sharing, but I cannot see what I'm sharing. Let me see what I do here. Okay, yeah, I'm back to it. So yeah, there's a condition right here. The company shall restrict welding operations to a maximum of 8 hours per day. So the welding rod that they use at this facility contained 2% manganese. When we did the emission rate calculations, which you guys are going to do some of these in the next component, when we did the emission rate calculation and then we modeled it through using AirMod as the dispersion model, it came up to as non-compliance if they were to operate that weld cell for any more than 8 hours a day. So they had a choice. They could restrict their operations to 8 hours per day, or they could install a piece of pollution control equipment. They opted to restrict their welding operations to a maximum of 8 hours per day. The issue with a condition like this on an environmental compliance approval is the first thing a Ministry of the Environment officer says when they walk in is, have you restricted your operations to 8 hours per day? And the facility would say yes, then he would say, prove it. So we had to have logbooks in place at this facility to ensure that every time the well cell was used, we would log the number of hours. What we eventually did with this is we ended up putting a monitor on the exhaust fan, so that when it was switched on, it would start to record on a digital recorder when it started and when it went off, so we could see how many hours a day it operated. Right, so that was one condition. Notification of complaints. The company shall notify the district manager in writing of each environmental complaint within 2 business days of the complaint. The notification shall include a description of the nature of the complaint, the time and the date, and a description of the measures taken to address the cause of the incident. So you can see how it can be a big issue if a member of the public calls a plant, gets no response from them, and then decides that they're going to call the Ministry of the Environment and say, hey, listen, I called this plant yesterday. I got no response back from them. Essentially, what the ministry does is they wait till the 2 days have ticked by, and then they will conduct some type of inspection, and then the facility is issued with a notice of violation against their environmental compliance approval because they did not notify the district manager within 2 business days of the complaint. So as you can see, these certificates come with very detailed conditions. And this is an area where environmental compliance auditing can be really beneficial, because if you're not complying with the conditions of your approval is actually in jeopardy. It could theoretically be revoked by the ministry, and you're no longer approved for your industrial emissions. So it's an area that facilities really focus on to make sure that they're complying. So I just want to show you one other thing. Okay, so did my screen change for you guys? So you now see the subject waste generator inspection report? Yes. Yep, I guess you guys can see it. So this is a typical inspection report that we would get from the ministry after they just randomly shown up to do an inspection. So so this environmental officer, she just randomly showed up at this facility called Metric Woods Limited in Mississauga, and she was there for the specific objective of a subject waste generator inspection. Right, so she came in, she gives you a bit of an outline here. You know, she says on September 22nd, Provincial Officer Anna Salami conducted an inspection at the above noted facility. The inspection involved a file review of the ministry's HWIN records at the Halton Peel District Office, on-site records, and a tour of the facility. All right, so that's essentially what she did. She checks all these things off as she walks down through here. Subject, and this is one of her findings. Subject waste is temporarily stored in a dedicated area of the facility indoors, and then taken to the neighboring facility, which is called Van Lam. Although the pails appear to be in good condition and free of leaks and spills, it was recommended that the company install secondary containment. And then she goes on to say the company shall ensure that a notice is given to the regional director for any and all subject waste at the facility for a period exceeding 90 days and within five business days after the 90th day. So I believe if we scroll down here, actions required, Metric Woods shall implement a procedure to ensure that a notice is given to the regional director for any or all subject waste stored at the site for a period exceeding 90 days. That shall be done no later than November the 10th. Metric Woods shall ensure that subject waste temporarily stored on site, store, handled, and maintained in a manner to prevent damage or spills. That shall be done by November the 10th. The company shall submit in writing actions taken to resolve the generator number to reflect the waste shipments from Van Lam. This will be submitted to the underside no later than November the 10th, 2020. Sorry, 2017. So you can see now we're in a position where we're now dealing with this on the ministry's terms. They've given some very stringent deadlines to comply with this. And interestingly, there was no waste at this facility that had been stored on site for more than 90 days, but we could not prove it because they had very poor records surrounding their waste storage. So when she asked how long the waste had been stored there, nobody could give her a good answer. So she wrote them up for storing waste on site for more than 90 days. So we had to come along. We had to prepare this notice of storage of waste. This was all filled out, and it along with, I think we should have one other document here that I was hoping that I could show you, but maybe not. You guys can stare at some mold spore sample results while we're looking at it. No, I'm not going to be able to quickly find this. I don't. Yep, this is what I was looking for. So this was the one of the procedures that was required by her notice of violation. You can see the effective date matched the date that she had on her notice of violation, and essentially this it goes through what is the purpose of this procedure, basically to store waste properly, who is responsible for the procedure. So in this case, it was the plant manager, the hazardous waste information network, how they're going to manage that. They're going to pay their fees by the 15th of the month, on-site storage of waste, where it's going to be stored, how it's going to be stored, when it's going to be shipped, how the containers are going to be labeled, spill containment, inspection of waste storage area, disposal of hazardous waste, and how that's going to be done. So you can see these very simple tasks of not being able to demonstrate that the waste hadn't been stored on site for 90 days can escalate into significant amounts of work. We actually did all of the work for this facility, and one of the interesting things about this particular facility is there was Metric Woods. Beside them was another company called Van Lam. Beside them was another company called Doma. When she was doing the Metric Woods inspection, she found out that Van Lam and Doma and Metric were all owned by the same companies. So she decided she was going to go visit those two as well. And all three companies were written up for exactly the same thing. And we had to deal with it for three companies. So as I say, a classic example of how had maybe an environmental compliance audit being done ahead of time, this would have been picked up and we would have dealt with it on our terms. But the non-compliance, potential non-compliance, was not previously identified, and we had to help that facility out. And it's expensive to get that work done, because now you're dealing with you have to go to the consultant and say, I have these three plants, we've been nailed with these three things. You need to drop everything, and you need to get these responses to the ministry within these deadlines. So I have been a consultant for probably too many years. I think it's about 25 years. I know the majority of the environmental officers in the Greater Toronto area, and we regularly go back to them and say to them, listen, your deadline's it's a bit too tight. Can we extend that? And they will work with us to extend it out. But you're still dealing with it on their terms. So I think once again, I've been talking maybe more than I should be, because we're not going to get through these slides and on to the next slide, or the next component. So we have done this one on when waste audits and reduction plans are required. Conducting a waste audit involves more than simply measuring or estimating the quantity and composition of waste. It must also look at the underlying reasons for waste generation and the operational factors which contribute to the waste. Under the regulation, all waste units must address the amount, nature, and composition of the waste, how the waste is produced, including any management policies, practices that relate to the production of waste, and how the waste is managed. And as you can see from this picture on the right, 3 hours audits are not a pleasant thing to do. We used to do a lot of 3 hours audits, but boy, I'm telling you, we spent a lot of time digging our way through some pretty messy garbage bags, and it's a thing that we tend to not do anymore. It's been, I'd say, 5 years since we last did a 3 hours waste audit. People who work for me, they just used to cringe when they knew a waste audit was coming up. All right, developing a waste reduction work plan. The information resulting from the waste audit form is the basis for developing the waste reduction work plan. The work plan addresses 3R opportunities which will be pursued. Regulation 102 requires that all completed waste reduction work plans must include all reasonable actions that can be taken, and these actions must follow the 3Rs hierarchy, with reduction as the first priority, followed by reuse and then recycling. I don't know if you recall back in the waste lecture when I was given that example of waste audits that we did. One of the big things that we used to find was, just massive amounts of paper towel that would originate from the washrooms of these facilities. And, an action that can be taken, or a common action to be taken to significantly reduce those waste streams, is the installation of warm air hand dryers and the installation of the reusable cloth hand towels. So those are two basic opportunities that can be taken to reduce waste. Okay, in general, the following steps should be taken in developing a waste reduction work plan: review current 3Rs activities, identify areas of greatest waste reduction impact via the 3Rs audit, assess waste reduction priorities, determine why the waste is generated in the first place, identify opportunities to reduce, reuse, and recycle wastes, assess impact of material purchasing practices on waste reduction, and complete an achievable waste reduction work plan. And achievable is the key thing there. If you identify a waste stream of just say cardboard, it really does make a whole bunch of sense that on your first waste reduction work plan, you're going to say, we're going to reduce our cardboard waste stream by 100%, because it takes time after you implement a waste reduction step for it to be implemented, and for workers in general to begin to understand that this is what they need to do. So typically you start off with waste reduction targets of maybe 30-40%, and then you just maintain that through the preparation of these waste reduction work plans. Waste audit documentation. A waste audit and waste reduction work plan must be documented in written reports. A report of a waste audit or waste reduction work plan must be on a form provided by the ministry or follow the same format. A report of a waste audit or waste reduction work plan must be retained on file for 5 years. The waste reduction work plan or summary of the work plan must be posted where workers at the site will see it. Workers must be allowed to see the work plan on request, and the person responsible for the designated project must submit the audit on work plan to a ministry director within 7 days if requested. Right. So these requirements, they require that that these work plans be maintained on site and to be made available to the ministry, or to even submit them if requested. But if you looked at more detail at that subject waste inspection report that was done for those facilities, you would think that would be a classic time when they would look at 3Rs waste audits and work plan waste reduction work plans. But they were not looked at all, even though she was there specifically to conduct a waste audit. ISO 14001 environmental management systems. Excuse me. An environmental management system is a framework that allows an organization to consistently control its significant impacts on the environment, reduce the risk of pollution events, ensure compliance with environmental legislation, and continually improve its processes and operations. ISO 14001 is an internationally accepted standard that defines the requirements for establishing, implementing, and operating an EMS. So ISO 14001 environmental management systems, they're essentially a voluntary activity. There are no regulations that say that you will develop and implement an ISO 14001 program. But essentially what has happened over the years, especially when you're dealing with large industrial facilities and they're providing, parts or components to even larger manufacturers or assembling plants, is that those larger assembly plants, they're requiring their suppliers to be ISO 14001 certified. So though even though it's not a regulatory requirement, many facilities still have to do them because they are supplying to large customers, and as part of that large customers environmental program, they're insistent that their suppliers be ISO 14001 certified. And I mentioned some of the components of that in our waste lecture last a couple of weeks ago, I guess. But I mean, it's you can get these implemented to various degrees. If the facility is really, if they really aggressively go after their environmental footprint, they can have a very good and strong ISO 14001 management system. But if they're a facility that really don't take it that seriously, the 14001 system can be fairly weak and have some fairly minor targets associated with it. ISO 14001 environmental policy: top management shall define the organization's environmental policy, ensure that it is appropriate to the nature, scale, and environmental impacts of its activities, includes a commitment to continual improvement and prevention of pollution, includes a commitment to comply with relevant environmental legislation and regulations, provide the framework for setting and reviewing environmental objectives and targets, is documented, implemented, and maintained and communicated to all employees, and is available to the public. This is an example of GM Canada's environmental policy. It's funny when you read these, they all sound, very similar. If you look at, their point number one: comply with applicable environmental laws and regulations. That could be taken as the C in that COPS that I was, the acronym I was telling you about. Assign management responsibility for the environment in all areas of our facilities. So this policy is saying they're going to make, senior management responsible. And, those senior managers, they're the people who can direct the people below them and provide the funding to make sure that their environmental management system works. But under ISO 14001, these environmental policies need to be available to the public. So you can go on to any major company's website and generally find their environmental policy. I believe if you went to the St. Mary's Cement website, you would find their policy, and likewise AG Simpson in Oshawa, you would find their corporate environmental policies on their websites. An organization that is registered to the ISO 14001 standard must include an audit component as part of their environmental management systems. These audits are planned and conducted in order to evaluate the performance of the EMS. The scope of these types of audits depends on the nature of the EMS at an individual facility. Some of the audits are internal and others are conducted by a third party. So the majority of the facilities that I deal with, they will conduct internal ISO 14001 audits annually for 2 years. Then on the third year, they will conduct an external environmental EMS audit, where a company that's registered to certified companies under ISO 14001 will come in, and they will monitor it on that third year. So that's typically what we find, is that most companies will do an internal audit. You know, some of them will do it every 6 months, but they'll only audit a certain portion of the audit of the management program every 6 months. But they're all in some way, shape, or form doing internal audits. Okay. Resource consumption audits, used to determine where resources are used in order to identify opportunities for conservation, and includes energy audits, water audits, raw material consumption audits. Many large facilities have been conducting energy audits extensively, especially after time of use rates came into place, where, you know, the amount of money you're paying for hydro changes depending on the time of day, because industrial facilities, they cannot generally control the times that they're auditing, that they're operating. So if they conduct energy audits to find, you know, how can we minimize the amount of energy that we're using, so that we're not being hit as hard by these time of use power costs. And they will look at things, is there ways where we can shift some of our processes to off-peak times, where we're paying less for the power, and they look at individual processes and look at how can they reduce energy consumption on those processes by doing things like switching out electrical motors to more efficient motors. And one of the big areas that many of our clients do audits in is in compressed air audits. If you go into any major industrial facility, you will find very large compressed air systems that provide that facility with compressed air. And compressed air systems are notorious for having leaks. So in many cases, when they do these audits, they find out that 50-60% of the cost of operating their air compressor systems is being spent just to make up the air that's leaking from the system. So that is an area that there's a lot of work being done on. And if you wanted to take a quick look at some of the steps that's been taken in this, there's a large glass manufacturing facility in Collingwood, Ontario. I believe it's Pilkington. If you Google Pilkington, they've actually just recently installed a massive battery bank, so that they can be charging that battery bank in off-hour periods, and then when they're on the peak periods for electricity use, they switch from pulling power from the grid to pulling power from these massive battery banks. I am not sure how big these battery banks are. They would have to be pretty big to provide the kind of power that plant needs. But I'm going to be in Collingwood on the weekend, so hopefully I'll be able to take a look and see if I can see their battery banks. But water audits, again, there are significant costs associated with the use of water. A residential home and an industrial facility, you get charged for water coming into your facility or your home, but you're also charged a sewage fee for the discharge of that water back out of your facility. And in industrial facilities, they also have the added problem, that a significant portion of that water has to go through a wastewater treatment plant. So there can be significant costs by conducting a water audit and seeing where can you reduce your costs associated with water. For the students who are in A.G. Simpson there, I mean, you take a look at that. You look at that facility, and you can see, I mean, they're using just massive amounts of water. And we have actually done water audits of their processes and showing where they can significantly reduce the amount of water that they're using. And the municipalities, they like to see water audits get done as well, because at the end of the day, all the water that's being discharged to municipal sanitary sewer system is moving through municipal plants. If they can reduce the amount of water that they have to treat at their plants, it opens up capacity that can be used, for when areas are undergoing development. Energy audits, and the bracket here is industrial. Comprehensive energy audit includes analysis of energy consumption and costs, inventory of energy use, list of all energy consuming loads and measure the consumption, identification of energy saving opportunities, operational and technological measures to reduce energy waste, assessment of benefits, determine potential energy and cost savings along with co-benefits. So you actually have consulting companies that specialize in the performance of these energy audits, but it is actually helpful when you have technical people involved in these audits who understand the actual processes. Because I want to quickly show you something, an example of this, if I can find it. I may not be able to find it now, but if I can quickly find it. All right, so if we come back to this environmental compliance approval, right? If we look at the exhaust stack serving the welding operation in this case, exhausting into the air at a volumetric flow rate of 1.3 cubic meters per second. So this facility's whole dispersion model and their demonstration of compliance was based on the fact that this weld cell exhausts through a fan having a flow rate of 1.3 cubic meters per second. What we find often with energy audits is that one of the recommendations that the energy auditor will have is that they replace motors serving these large air pollution control equipment with motors equipped with energy saving devices that allow them to turn down the airflow of these fans. And if they're implemented without input from technical people, theoretically you could have a non-compliance, because at a lower airflow rate, your point of impingement concentration of a contaminant would increase. So there is a role to be played in these energy audits. For people with a technical background in air pollution control equipment and in other areas. I do know companies, and I'll use A.G. Simpson as an example again. They have one environmental person that is dedicated to conducting these energy audits within their facilities. So he spends most of his time running around monitoring power usage and air usage, and he's probably saved A.G. Simpson his annual salary 10 times over just through the energy saving steps that he's put in place. So that is it for audits. I think I probably shouldn't say I think. I know there are no questions on the next test that relate to audits, but it was a component that we really needed to touch on and go through. So it's 10:02, or actually it's 1:45. I really don't want to start the air emission component now. So what I'll do is I'll let you guys get going 15 minutes early. If you want to take a look at the air emission lecture slides, they are now available. But anybody have any questions? Any questions about audits? Any questions about anything that we discussed? No, looks like everyone is good. Okay, you're going to hear this again at the next lecture, but I think a bunch of you guys are sitting on this survey that you got from the college that needs to be back by November 24th. I keep getting emails basically saying a lot of students still haven't completed and submitted this. So Aaron just said hard to find time to complete it. I have never seen it. I don't know if these things are time consuming. I'll ask this question to Aaron. Is that a time consuming thing to do? I mean, how long can it take to tell them that your professor's great? Yeah, so it looks like it's a fairly long form. Megan says it takes about 3 minutes. Okay, so I mean, there's no penalty associated with these. If you guys don't do them, there's no penalty. It just if as many of you do it as you can, it just gives the college a better understanding on how professors are performing, and if the and if there's any, and if your professor maybe needs to take a remedial course to improve his teaching skills. So as I say, there's no downside to not sending it back, but I would really encourage you to fill it up and send it back, and maybe I'll start getting some happier emails from the college saying, "Yay, most of your students have done it." Okay, but you'll hear the same thing again at the next lecture. Anyway, thanks for attending. Those of us that could actually make it to the lecture. Thanks for attending. I will see you in about 20 minutes. Okay, thank you very much, guys.